necessarily have to be your goal. It's a fine goal as far as goals go. But this, just on that scale, remember that Amish to Texas scale of where we would need to be, what would victory look like? We would roughly be living in a world where we're all contributing about 18,000 pounds less than we are right now. Now, it's not any one individual. That includes all the companies, that includes all the industries, that includes all the utilities as well. So our share of this would actually be a lot smaller if those companies do more. Our share of this would be a little bigger if they end up not doing as much. So just keep that in mind. So here we are in Minnesota. And does anyone have a guess actually to where most of our emissions come from here in Minnesota? Farming, exactly. So farming is number one, agriculture, about 47 million tons a year, followed by transportation, followed by power plants. Now, each of these could be its own topic under the massive industry-wide changes we would have to make. In a nutshell, farming's at the top, not just because of the cows. Cows burp a lot, and that's a lot of methane. You know, the waste produces a lot of methane. Really, it's about land use. It's all about land use. Where we get our fields from, it's in the north. We've torn down a lot of trees to build up these potato fields. In the south, we've drained a lot of wetlands. And these wetlands, after they're drained, they just continuously emit methane because it's basically all the carbon that had been stored there for 1,000 years since the glaciers first left is now finally getting the chance to decompose for the first time. So you have all this carbon decomposing slowly. It's like a slow forest fire, releasing emissions on the land we built to farm. So I bring this up now, not because we're going to talk exactly how to save these industries or anything, but because when you look at your own personal emissions, it's going to make sense that the places we should start to look that will find the biggest gains in what we eat, and how we get around and what we drive, and how much power we use, and where we get our power from. Okay, so power. On this page is the exact way, I'm sorry for how bare-boned these PowerPoints are. Someone told me once that you should never put on a PowerPoint what you can't write on a blackboard, and it just stuck with me, so it's going to be very simple. But the number one way most of us can reduce our emissions is, anyone have a guess on which one of these it is? It is the heat pump. And it kind of makes intuitive sense when you think of most of what we can do in Minnesota. Depends on how cold our winters are. It's kind of our punishment for living in a place where the air will kill us half the year. But you can save up to 4,000 and 8,000 pounds. Now, this is a really wide variety of how much you can save. This is based on, just the best I could do, based on the average home. So if you can imagine the average Minnesota home built in like the 1960s, 70s, about 3 bedrooms, probably about like, 1,600, 17, not that big, square footage-wise. If you can switch out an old gas furnace, new electric heat pump, it can save you about 4,000, 8,000 pounds. New gas furnaces, it's going to be on the lower end that are already burning pretty cleanly and pretty strongly. Certain kinds of things, some of us are on electric. Probably not many of us here in the Twin Cities area are burning other types of fuel. But mainly you get the big ones if you have a much older furnace that's only at 80% or so efficiency, and you get to one of these new super efficient heat pumps. So 8,000 pounds at the most. So solar panels, up to 6,000 pounds. 6,000 pounds for solar panels. So I just like to stop right there at just look at those two numbers when I think of this. So you think back at 18,000 might be our goal. And when I started this, I had no idea what they were asking us from the UN, if we were going to meet this 52% climate change. You could have told me it was be full Amish. I just wouldn't have known. And then when I just look at these first two numbers and I see, okay, switch to a furnace, install solar panels, already at 14,000 pounds just in those two things right there. Now, when we wrote this story, first question we got from a lot of people is, are you really expecting me to buy those things? No. I would never recommend anyone spend money for any reason at any time. But there comes a time when your furnace breaks down and you have to replace it. Pretty much however you replace it now, it's going to get better. Even if you can't do a full electric or it just doesn't make sense, just installing a higher end, new, modern gas furnace will probably save you 4,000 pounds, just from an older, less efficient model. And that's just kind of baked in now. Like there's nothing we can do to stop that efficiency, because all of our furnaces, if we're a homeowner, are going to break down eventually, and they're going to have to be replaced. So we just kind of have to do it as it comes. You don't have to rush to do those things. Solar panels, again, very expensive. So definitely not recommending anyone just go out and buy solar panels for this. But if you wanted to know about how much good they would do, it's kind of on that path. Obviously, big investment up front. That you save a lot on your energy bill as they're coming through. But yeah, and then just even a quick one: air dry laundry. Just not using your dryer, very small, but 300 pounds over the course of a year. Just kind of give you a scale of what you would do. Okay. So a lot of these things that might be based on homeowners, it just makes sense when you think of these big ticket purchases. The people with homes are going to be the ones who can have the easiest gains to make, lowest hanging fruit to make. So when you deal with power here, just because Father Griffin, he brought it up, saving lights. How much do you think turning off light switches might help you over the course of a year? Just being very vigilant about that. The answer is almost nothing. Our power grid has become so much cleaner, and our lights have become so much better over the years that they're just super efficient. They last a long time. You don't have to replace them. If you accidentally leave your lights on, versus if you're really diligent about shutting them off, it's probably not going to make a noticeable difference. I couldn't even find a way to measure it in the tools I was looking at to use. But where you want to direct your attention, that older generation, I think, lived with that because they had to replace their light bulbs all the time, and it actually made a difference in their electric bill. It doesn't do that anymore, but what does are our energy vampires. And so if we can use that same effort, we use that turning off lights into our energy vampires, it could save up to 1,300 pounds a day. And now what is an energy vampire? It's essentially anything that plugs into a wall and is continuously drawing power. The biggest tell is if you can see a light like this, that means even when your computer is off or anything is off, it's still drawing power. It's all your iPhone chargers, it's your Wi-Fi, it's your internet router, it's your brand new TVs. It's anything that when you turn it off, it still has a light on. It just never actually shuts off, and it's continuously drawing power from you. And this adds up. This is actually real money going out the window every day. And I think, as Midwestern Catholics here, like it's disgusting to us almost if you waste. Like if Governor Walz was here and he ate a $500 breakfast, I would have to write about that as a journalist because taxpayers, it would be such a waste of taxpayer money. But each of us is probably wasting about that much money over the year just on things we already have turned off, power cords, things like that. This is actually really hard to be diligent about, I've noticed. If you just have your iPhone in a wall or whatever charger to actually go take the time and unplug it each time, it's difficult. The things that are worth their weight in gold are those light switches that actually turn off your outlets. And this is probably too much information for everyone, but I just remember as a kid we had some of those. And I'm in my house growing up, and that's where we had like the Nintendo 64 and all these fun things were plugged into that particular outlet. And I lived in fear of someone accidentally shutting that thing off when you're in the middle of like a video game as a kid. It just ruined it. But now it's just so much easier if you can put that internet connection, your router, onto one of those light switch outlets and just turn it off before you go to bed. You don't have to worry about plugging it in. There's also a bunch of power strips you can buy these days that really help so that they're not continuously drawing. They're almost like master switches where you have a main outlet, and when the thing that's plugged into that outlet is on, the rest of the outlet turns on. So if it's like you have a DVD player, a TV, an Xbox, whatever, it only turns on when that TV is on. When the TV's off, everything in that thing is off and nothing draws power. So just a really simple, cheap way, easy way to start thinking about some of that. New windows, probably the most boring thing on here. If you're a homeowner and you have to get new windows, extremely, extremely expensive. But we actually lose quite a lot of heat over the course of a year. on old drafty windows. And so you can save about 3,000 pounds. This is, again, these are based on averages, so the average size house. So you can imagine if your own house is a little bigger, it'd save more. If it's a little less, it'd save a little less. And this doesn't have to be a homeowner itself, too, with the new windows. Excel will actually come to your house, do an energy audit. They'll find drafty places and even just weather stripping. Things like that can really add up. New insulations absolutely help. Okay, any questions on the power before we move to our next things? So I grew up in a big family, so I'm a lot more comfortable when people are just yelling at me. I work in a big newsroom too, so just the better chaos, yeah. I'm not a homeowner. Right. Heat pump, it's a new type of heater, essentially. It's a hyper-efficient, I guess the best way to describe it, a hyper-efficient heater on one hand and air conditioner on the other. It does both at once. It basically works by sucking the heat out of one side, transferring it over to the new side. Right, exactly. And it's hyper efficient at that. Yeah. But the thing is in terms of energy saving, when it's that cold, it's not very efficient because the machine won't start freezing. Right. But it's a lot cheaper than to have to replace all the plumbing in the house. Right. And usually I think it stops being efficient around 20 degrees. I think that's generally when they tell you. And here in Minnesota, it just gets so cold that even if you get a heat pump, you usually have to have a backup furnace to do it. So it's not a great way if your goal is to actually get rid of natural gas, methane gas, out of your house. You still probably need this as a backup for once it gets below 20 degrees. But we had to actually switch. I had to actually switch over to one of these heat pumps recently. Just one day in the middle of winter, furnace started sounding like it was a rocket ship about to take off. And you call in someone, they come in. There's enough rebates now, tax rebates, that it actually comes out to about a wash between a new furnace and a new heat pump, so it's kind of equal on as far as money goes. But it changes your bill over. You're no longer paying that natural gas bill, but you're paying a much higher electric bill. So the money, I think, it kind of about washes off. It's hard to tell, but okay, transportation. So this project for us at the Startup Unit actually started when I talked to my editor, and we were just talking about this. And I just had asked him out of the blue, what's actually better for the environment? Getting an electric vehicle, an EV, or installing solar panels. In Minnesota, here where the winter drains batteries, batteries don't run as well in the winter, and where it's dark for so much of the year, so you can't count on solar panels. So does anyone have a guess? So remember, an electric vehicle, on average, based on the average amount that people drive, 6,000 pounds a year. Anyone want to have a guess for what solar panels would do? Yeah. It is. An electric vehicle is a little bit better. 7,000 pounds. So this isn't, let's all go rush out to the Tesla store, but it kind of makes sense now why people are pushing this so much, I feel like, and why it would make sense for us to build out an electric grid a little much. So 7,000 pounds. This is based on just how much people drive, just the average car on Minnesota's roads versus, the average daily commute. How much they would spend. This includes everything. This includes mining, what it takes to mine the cobalt, versus what it takes to run the gas engine, down to it. Yeah.
Does don't the batteries require energy to be made for the vehicles? Does that create air pollution too when you build batteries?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Do they? Yeah, it absolutely does, and that's kind of baked into the life cycle analysis that they do. This is basically just straight from the EPA and some of the other federal agencies that measure these things. So they measure out the entirety of what it costs to mine, what it costs to install, what it costs to build, what it costs to replace, what it costs to throw away, every part that it takes to take the electric vehicle. Versus all that stuff is the same. You know, you still have to build batteries, you still have to build almost everything else for the internal combustion engine, and then you still have to burn the gasoline. Yeah, 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 yeah. So these are based on, and I'll show you guys some of the tools later, but they're based either on the numbers as they're presented to me, either straight by the scientists or they're coming from EPA reports, UN reports. There's a lot of carbon calculators that they built out there. It depends on how far into the weeds you want to get onto this, but like Excel will tell you, if you show them your energy bill, Excel will tell you exactly how much pounds of carbon you're emitting, and if you throw in with the EPA the exact size of your house and where it is, they'll compare what a heat pump will actually do. You know, the exact changes a heat pump would do versus a natural gas, you know, furnace, for example, or however it might be. So you can really get down to the dollar amount if you want to do this. So hybrids, these are extremely popular now. They're probably the faster growing of the two because they, you know, electric vehicles, they come with all their mileage problems, whereas hybrids, you still can drive as far as you want. It switches over to gas. These are the plug-ins. You can do most of your driving day to day, your commute back and forth to work, just on an electric charge. And then when you have to actually go further, whatever the range might be, it switches over to gas. So hybrids are extremely popular, still save a ton of emissions. Unfortunately, they're probably the most expensive of the three different types of cars over the life cycle. So over the life of a car, the electric vehicle it's the biggest hurdle to pay for up front, but it's cheaper down the road. You don't have to do as many oil changes. The maintenance is a little easier, and of course, you don't have to buy gas. So they calculate the amount you estimate to spend over the entire life of the car, say 15 years or however long you drive a car. The electric vehicle comes in cheapest. The hybrids come in the most expensive because you're kind of paying for both engines, or you're paying for a motor and an engine. You still have to do all the oil changes and maintenance. You still have to buy some gas, but they're usually cheaper on the outset. And then the regular cars, of course. A lot of people have been loving their electric cars. I had a colleague at the Star Tribune who unfortunately just passed away, but she had one, and we drove around the state a lot in it, just working on stories. And there were times, you know, just thinking of this, where we were driving, you know, down south on some nitrate story or something, and she would just be driving, and she would just, I love this car. She would just say that, and I've never had a car like that. I can't vouch for hybrids. I just know that people who do have them do love them, if you're thinking. But always riding the bus. This is if you were to ride the bus all day, every day, you know, for all of your errands to work. Again, it's just based on the average amount that Minnesotans drive versus the average amount of carbon that usually produces in a typical Minnesotan car, which I think it's like 22.7 miles to the gallon or something like that. Again, you can get as detailed as you want on your own individual case. But you can see it's about as good as an electric vehicle. This kind of surprised me a little bit. I thought it would have been more, but of course, buses still have emissions too. And commuting on the bus, though, which is usually a much more realistic option, saves about 4,800 pounds. So you can do most of the good that you could do from a very expensive car, you know, for essentially free on just commuting. And what I like about the idea about a commuting to work on the bus, this is one I've actually started to try on my own, is it's not replacing like the freedom and the fun parts of everything you do with a car, the quick errand running, but it's replacing the worst part of my day, you know, the commute into downtown traffic. Yeah, and again, this is probably too much information, but I went to a Catholic school, a Jesuit school in high school, and if you guys know the story of St. Ignatius, founder of the Jesuits, he's like the patron saint of young boys. He's the boyiest saint there ever was. He got wounded, and he's stuck on a sick bed as he's a young man. And they're wounded in the Middle Ages, not much to do, in desperate pain. And he's daydreaming all day long, just daydreaming, fantasizing. He's fantasizing about all these romantic things. And he's feeling empty inside. He feels very empty inside. And then he starts fantasizing about being a saint. And that's when he starts feeling energized. And that was the life-changing moment of his life. And the Jesuits will talk about this all the time, and they pound it in your head when you're in high school. And what he did, what he learned from that, what he took away from that, was this 5-minute, he called it an examine. You just spend 5 minutes of your day really thinking about the things you did, comparing them to how they made you feel. What made you feel emptier? What made you feel better? What made you feel energized? It's a tough thing to do. It's not, you're not trying to be hard on yourself, and you're not trying to think of what should I feel good about. You're actually thinking about what things did make you feel. And so they had us do this in high school, and none of us, of course, ever did it. It's a bell would ring. You're supposed to do this for 5 minutes, but we were 16 years old, and we had much better things to think about, but it stayed in the back of my mind, and I kind of start doing it now that I'm old and don't really have that many dreams anymore. But I was doing this, and I started doing it just after writing the story. I was like, okay, what if I just commute to work on the bus? And I started thinking about how I actually felt after doing it, and it was amazing, because I'm one of those guys, I'm driving through traffic, especially rush hour, and I drive like this, I'm just tense and mad, and I think about punching people in the back of the head, like excessively, like excessive amount of people. But when I'm on the bus, just this short bus ride, I start leaning back a little bit, I'm on my phone, and it added about like 10 minutes to my day, but it started making me feel a lot better. And so I'd invite people to try it. You might be surprised. I never thought I would like riding the bus, but I actually like it a lot more than dealing with that kind of rush hour traffic. Yeah. How about biking? Biking is great. Yeah, biking is a complete and total victory for the environment. And it basically wipes it out, any emissions you could have. If you could do it for work every day, it would be much even higher than 7,000. It'd probably be in the 9,000 to 10,000 range. Yeah. That's a year. So that it takes a lot of time to add up. And I just did the 5 miles because I wasn't thinking about a commute to work. And it depends on how long you want to drive, but you can extrapolate it in your own head how far you want to go on these bikes. But just these simple, like 2-mile trips to the grocery store and back, or to run an errand and back, just once a week even add up. If you were able to commute during it, it'd be much more, versus driving, of course. So just small thing, add up a lot over time. Okay, transportation. Now we get to the really tough one, the food. So, as Minnesotans, the biggest thing we emit, it comes from agriculture. So this might be where we see some of the trickier things. And you might have heard this. So I've heard it before I even started reporting the story, this is what I heard kind of most about and hated the most to hear about, was this idea of going vegetarian. Every now and then there's this article that says, if you go vegan, you'll do blah, 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 blah. And so I just wanted to try to satisfy myself. Okay, I'm going to do the math. I'm going to see how much this really does if you were to go completely vegan. And if you eat the amount that the average American person eats, the amount of meat, and you go change that completely to vegetables, it would save about 4,000 pounds a year. But what they're really talking about in that case isn't meat. What they're really talking about is beef. If you were to just replace beef with chicken, with pork, with fish, with any other thing, you save virtually all of that same thing. And what it is about beef? Well, cows, and I think it's sheep, but we don't eat as much sheep here. They're ungulates. They burp a lot. They're very inefficient stomachs. So already they're producing way much more. They produce a staggering amount of carbon emissions to raise a pound of beef. I think it's like 70 pounds of carbon emissions to raise 1 pound of cow. And when you compare that with like a pig, it's like 20, 30. Actually, I have this terrible, hard to read, but you see beef. So this is the amount of carbon dioxide emission for a pound of beef versus, fish, pork, poultry, on down the line for the easiest things to eat. Yeah. Yeah. It's the hardest thing. Yeah, and again, this kind of, no, of course, yeah, and I'm hoping you can use this for yourself and not definitely. Of course, I would never recommend. I mean, this is the home of Andrew Zimmern, you know, the great food chef and critic, and he traveled Bizarre Eats with him. I loved that show. Traveled around the world, and what I loved about him is he came back thinking that a cheeseburger is the best food in the world, and I agree with that. If you want a cheeseburger, eat a cheeseburger. If you want a steak, eat a steak. But I hope we can do it intentionally, and this is my big takeaway with this, was to be a lot more intentional about when I'm eating these things, because I think a lot of us have kind of sleptwalked into this, and it's kind of like what we do every Lent. You know, we sleepwalk, and then we give up, you know, sugar, whatever it might be, and it kind of helps wake us up from the sleepwalking, turns us back towards the good. And I think, you know, like for me, if you go down to Chipotle and it's just, you're getting a burrito and they're like, you want the chicken, or you're not really thinking of, it's not an intentional decision, I'm gonna go eat beef. It just kind of ends up happening that you eat a lot of beef. And so for me, I'm just being very intentional now about when I'm eating beef, why I'm eating beef, and that I'm not just accidentally becoming a glutton for it, just accidentally never even making a decision, but it just turns out I've been eating a lot. And remember, this isn't eat healthier. This is, you can eat ribs, you can eat chicken wings, you can eat any kind of pub food, chicken tenders. Lots of easy things to replace this with. If you come out, if you extrapolate just one decision with one time, 38 pounds. And if you extrapolate what one decision, if you just took the bus instead of driving to work on, say, the average 20-minute commute, it'd be about 20 pounds. So the biggest decision you might make on a climate on any day might be in Chipotle when they're asking if you want the chicken or the beef. So just keep that in mind. And then my last slide here, really, on the last tip, is the best and most obvious. It's the one that surprised me the most. So we did this project, and I think we did about like 10 stories with it, 10 different stories with it on how to do this. There's lots of different appliances there. I only got to a few of them in here, but you know, dishwashers are now so vast that advanced that it's actually better to use a dishwasher than hand wash. They just use so much less warm water, and warm water is the one that really creates a lot of carbon emissions because that's what you're heating up. But by far, like 10 times, the most popular story we wrote, it was another reporter who wrote it, was this: clothes. We go through so many clothes as Americans that if you just donate them, if you just don't throw them away, buy the same amount of clothes you're already buying, but just don't throw any of them away, it would save 2,000 pounds a year. And remember, if our goal is 18,000 pounds, that's a huge chunk of it for free, for nothing, that we should probably be doing already anyway. And the surprising thing for me is it's not like I'm out there throwing away a lot of clothes, but they gather up. You know, you outgrow them, especially during COVID. I outgrew all of them. And I was, you get kind of hard on yourself. You get kind of picky with yourself, like, oh, this is so ugly. No one's ever going to buy this. They all buy it. If you give it to Goodwill, Vincent de Paul, any of the thrift stores, 99.99% we can recycle or we can resell. That's a straight quote that we found in that story. And what they do is, even the button, you know, if they have tears, if it's terrible, they might not try to resell it. But what they do is, by the pound, they can sell these to different companies. You know, it's how they stuff some mattresses. You know, they chop it up, they find different uses. And from just the climate part of this, the big thing you're trying to save is just this rotting. Like, where these emissions come from is just your cotton and your polyester rotting in a dump. And however we can stop that rotting from happening stops these emissions from coming. So yeah, I think that's basically the big ones I wanted to get to. But again, we're happy to have any questions. And here's some of the bigger tools that I mentioned. I'm sorry they're so long, but I'm hoping maybe you can take a picture or write them down. Energy Sage, they're the best ones for if you want to look at like solar panels and things like that on your house. They can give you exact cost estimates. They can judge just by Google Maps how much sunlight you'll get per day. And they can use that to kind of estimate how much. They're basically mainly on the costs, because most people think about this in terms of money, not in terms of how many pounds of carbon you can make. That's why this story was so hard to write. But they can give you great advice on just how much your electricity bill will go down. I think they said the average now in Minnesota is it's about 11 years, a little over 11 years, for you to make your money back on what it costs to install solar panels. Fueleconomy.gov is a great one where you can put in what any EV, any kind of model of car you drive, any gas car, any car you have right now, and just compare it to what either a new model would be, or just get a better idea of what yourself emitting on your car ride. And then you can, if you're taking a bike, you can just X that out completely. aworld.com is an interesting one. This is one of those this is an app on your phone. It's kind of like a game. I don't know how much I like it, but if you really want to get down in the nittiest, grittiest, every single decision you make, it's kind of like those people who do diets and they actually count out every single calorie they eat over the course of a day. It's really advanced. I kind of like the more of, I understand McDonald's has a lot of calories, so of what, more general, but you can get into as much detail as you want. And then this Minnesota Center for the Environment, this super long one, they have really great details on heat pumps and furnaces and the most advanced things you can do there. So yeah, so I think that's all I got for you guys, and happy to answer any questions or hang around. And yeah.
We have a question over here. I'll start here.
Thanks, Greg. Very helpful. The information was really, really great. I did have one question regarding the heat pumps. Yeah. Is a geothermal furnace considered a heat pump or no?
Yeah. So there's two types of heat pumps. There's ones that collect air straight from the that work on air, and then there's others that are geothermal. The geothermals are much better. They're the best you can get. They're very, very expensive. So usually it's people who are building new try to get the geothermal. What they do is they go straight down into the earth where things never freeze, and they use that heat, and it's this closed system. Apparently they're super, what's the word? They last forever. Like you barely need any maintenance on them either. And it's this closed loop system. So they're even better than these air source heat pumps, which are the more common, easier to upgrade your home. Like anyone can get an air source heat pump. You'd have to do a lot of work to get a geosource. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I don't remember. I think you called them energy gremlins. I'm sorry. We'll use the mics.
The energy gremlins or whatever.
Yeah, the energy vampires.
Energy vampires, okay. So in Europe, when you check into a hotel, there's like this, you have to put your card in order to turn any electricity on. Is that what you're talking about, that you could actually do that in your home now?
No, but they do that, and I think they do that specifically for this reason. I think it ends up saving them a lot of money. No, but what I've been talking about is just there's every old house, just normal light switches will turn off randomly. I feel like some of them will turn off the outlets, and if you can find where your outlet lights are, that's just a great way for me, where I put like the internet router and things I don't want to keep continuously unplug and unplug, because it's just an easy way to turn them off. But that would be an interesting way if you could find a way to turn the power off. Because you think about that, like I would never turn my internet off at night before I did this, but that's constantly draining energy. That's constantly on, and that adds up, and it's a real electric bill over the course of a year.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Did you come across any data about fabrics or textiles, like in that slide you showed about clothing, similar to what you showed about meat? Like, is wool more or less sustainable than cotton or polyester or something like that?
That's a great question, and no, I haven't actually, but I do think polyester, anything with plastics is going to I'm sure, end up being on the worst, and the most natural wool, I imagine, will end up being on the best. But the point the story really relied on is if you can buy clothes that last, and I imagine the better clothes you have are the ones that last the longest, versus really against that fast fashion where people are buying, $5 swimsuits to use once and things like that just end up thrown away. But that is a great question, and I wish I had the answer, but no, I don't.
On the energy vampires piece, they make power strips that do that automatically, so they can So they can tell when your iPod's plugged, your iPhone's plugged in and actually trying to draw power, and when it's not, and then it doesn't give any power to the outlet when it's.
That's perfect.
So
Yes.
so that's another.
Buy those. Those are worth. Yeah, those are the great. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Greg, I've heard air travel can be a big source of carbon. So have you looked into or measured how much a plane trip somewhere would
I
cost?
haven't done, I think it'd be easy enough to find out if you started Googling that things, but I haven't done it on that specifically. Because people are flying more than ever, but I don't think that's a big part of our lives that we have to travel. Like people aren't, when you think of things to pare down, there's easier places to pare down. And this is just the skeptic reporter in me, but there's a huge push right now into, they're calling it sustainable aviation fuel. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to make a much bigger market for ethanol. And ethanol, when you go back to the farming and the land use, is a big source of our emissions when we're using so much land to grow corn, right? To grow corn that turns into gasoline. And what they want to do right now is start turning aviation fuel into that. And it's a way to make these flights less carbon intensive. And I haven't looked at the numbers yet, but I'm worried that it might be worse for Minnesota. It's a possibility that I'd like to look into, just depending on how it works out and what they count as aviation fuel and how many safeguards they put into how you grow it and things like that. But it is a good question, yeah.
I do believe that everything you presented is very short-sighted. First, whenever you go to transportation, it is not true that people will switch to buses and bike. In that, because, like myself, I drive about 40 to 50,000 miles a year, down to 60 just because I'm paying attention. And if you do not let me drive, I cannot work and I cannot make a living. Plus, if you are a mother or a father with a bunch of kids, it's not true that you're gonna go take the bus to go grocery shopping with 3 infants, a huge bag of groceries like that. So it's completely out of reality. And then that when you look at street, what's going on in Minneapolis, fine, you want bike lane. Don't take it over the car, because instead of having, like in Paris, 200 miles of traffic jam a day, now you have 600. Because you have increased, because people cannot move anymore and waste time in traffic jam. So the idea is you want to reduce emission, fine. You want to use battery, absolutely. We need battery chargers everywhere. We need the opportunity to move car without ever being in a traffic jam. Like they built Highway 394 when I was in grad school 30 years ago. And at the time, they wanted to put more lanes so you could enter the Lowry Tunnel without having a mile on 394 that goes all the way to Xerxes. If you take the number of cars that are stuck every day, you're not reducing, you are polluting more.
Let's let him respond.
Yeah, I mean, these are great. Again, these aren't recommendations necessarily. I wouldn't recommend that a family of 3 take the bus everywhere they go, especially not for every errand. But if you calculate just how much you might save by not commuting to work, I think that can make a significant difference. Then don't, yeah. This is just use these things in the back of the mind like you would count calories. This isn't a stop eating. Just don't overeat kind of thing. And you can use it whatever works your lifestyle to not overeat.
I'm one of those people that I got an electric car and then I annoyed everyone that I knew because I was evangelical about it. But and so I think it's not a one size fits all, and so that's sort of a menu of things that you can do. And for people that are you know, especially if you're a 2-car family and you have one car that you can take on road trips and you have another car that's more around town. You know, it's to me there was no trade-off. It was all upside. I was like, oh, I have no maintenance. I never have to go to a gas station, which is like, how many times are you like, oh, darn, I have to go get gas and I don't have time. You know, you just charge at home. It's super convenient, and you know, it accelerates faster. It's more fun to drive. It's not stinky. All the things. You can turn it on in your garage to warm it up because you're not gonna asphyxiate yourself from carbon monoxide poisoning. So, like, just the number of upsides was good. So anyway, it's not one size fits all. It's not for everyone, but there are some things that you know, that like if you know, it's a menu of things, and that's one that I think people can choose from it, and different people will choose different things.
Right.
You know.
Right. Absolutely.
Can you also clarify the 18,000 pounds again? Was that per year, per person?
Right, per year per person.
Per year per person.
And this is the big broad number of if you calculate how much emissions America would have to cut by 2030 to meet those UN goals. It comes out to a few billion tons a year. You just divide that by the amount of Americans you have, and you kind of come to this 18,000. And again, that's not on an ask of everyone to reduce 18,000, because it has to come from industry. Most of it will. Most of it's going to probably come from our utilities. They've already cut in half about what we do at power plants, and that's just almost pure economics. It's just a lot cheaper to do solar, wind, and nuclear than it is to do natural gas and coal.
Why don't you also thank him?
Oh, hey, this is going to be, if we can talk about this later, but I'm really curious about Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if in any of your research, did you find anything about the Amazon effect? Like, you know, we put in an order for like a stapler.
Right.
And then tomorrow we're going to put in an order for like a bag of candy, right? Like,
right.
Is that a problem? I'm sure it is.
It's a good question, and it's something I have to do a lot more studying on, because I've actually heard 2 different theories on this. That it's a lot worse because there's so many Amazon trucks going, but it also might save you a trip to the grocery store, and people are trying to figure out how many trips people are reducing, because now they don't have to drive to the grocery store versus just how many times they're sending the truck. And I know Amazon's been catching some fire lately, so they're trying to make it more obvious that you can do these bulk deliveries, you know, if you can wait 3 days or whatever, when they have a truck come into your neighborhood. I think they're trying. So that would involve a little more research, but it is something people should definitely be thinking about.
Okay, let's thank Greg Stanley for this fascinating talk. And
thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg.